Okay, so we're starting out here, and this is Life in Colonial America Rivalry. So we're going to actually be talking about war. And this is the French and Indian War, or as it's known, the 7 Years' War. So you can pause anytime along here as you're taking your notes, but this will be lesson 4. So remember, in the 1700s, England and France were the leading powers in North America. And both countries wanted to possess that land along the Mississippi River and the Ohio River Valley because it was really fertile, and there were lots of like beaver and fur to be had. Besides, the land was just really, really great land for settlement. So both France and England wanted this land. The French, remember, had a better relationship with the Native Americans because they weren't bringing families, they weren't settling. So they were trading, and they built a fort called Fort Duquesne, okay, in what is now Western Pennsylvania. But that was like Wild West territory during that period of time. So here we have a picture of George Washington, and militia is one of your vocabulary words. So remember, a militia is made up of ordinary citizens. So the governor of Virginia, actually a guy named Dinwiddie, wanted to drive the French out of that part of what is now Western Pennsylvania. And so he sent the militia led by George Washington. And George Washington was only 21 years old when he got sent on his first mission. And he gets sent out to engage with the French. You're going to actually have a video about that first battle. He builds a fort called Fort Necessity because it was very small and just some sort of place to kind of hide behind. And he and his men are attacked. They're attacked by the French, and the French have Native Americans as allies. So in Washington's very first battle, he is defeated. He's defeated by the French. And they don't kill him, but he ends up having to surrender. And this is technically the start of the French and Indian War. So George Washington actually is involved in the very first battle that is the start of the French and Indian War. So here you have a picture of young George Washington, and you can see they marched from Alexandria in Virginia and to the western part of Pennsylvania, and that's where Fort Necessity is. They actually have a park there that you can actually go and see what that fort looked like. So the Native Americans, they sided with the French because the French were trading with them and actually living with them, even intermarrying. They didn't really trust the English because the English kept moving west and moving families and taking their land. So you'll find during this war that the French are going to have more Native American allies because that was in their best interest. The French also had sent missionaries over, and many of the Native Americans actually had converted at this time to become Catholics. And that was, one of the big deals. Remember Gold, God, and Glory we talked about earlier? So the conversion, and convert, remember, is one of your vocabulary words, was a big deal both in New England and with the French. The British tried to make a treaty with the Iroquois Federation, but they refused an alliance. They did promise to remain neutral and not take any sides. So again, those were some of your vocabulary words. And the Iroquois Federation, they said they aren't going to fight on either side. They're going to be neutral. Benjamin Franklin then realized that England was going to be fighting France and that the colonies had a vested interest in this. And so he organized the Albany Conference, and this is the first time that the various colonies are going to come together, and he basically said we need to fight with the French, and we need to come together as a group united and fight and organize. So not all the colonies came, but some of the colonies came and they met with Benjamin Franklin. It did not work. He tried to bribe the Native Americans actually with whiskey and with weapons. This is not going to be the first time that we're going to see whiskey and weapons used with Native Americans. But this was a noble attempt by Benjamin Franklin, and the first attempt to unite the colonies. Benjamin Franklin then drew and published what we think is probably the very first political cartoon for talking about uniting the colonies. And the title of this, and you're going to see this several times, is called Unite or Die. And this is the political cartoon. He published that, and remember, he was a printer, and it was published in the Pennsylvania Gazette, and you can see that it's got the various colonies here, and they're separated. And basically he's saying we've got to come together, bring this separated snake together, and we need to unite or we will all die. So this is a cartoon that was used to support Franklin's wish, and he was published about the same time as the Albany Congress. And you're going to see this cartoon through the Revolutionary War, this idea that the colonies needed to come together, they needed to unite. So when the war starts, the French are actually going to be winning, especially on the frontier, because they have the assistance of the Native Americans, and they would attack small settlements. They were driving the settlers that had come from the East Coast, the colonial settlers, out. And this actually angered some of the people in the colonies and did encourage them to unite. This guy he's William Pitt, okay, and he's the prime minister in England. And he's looking at his English soldiers getting beat by the French, and he realized that most of his officers were really old, and that the troops weren't really being treated right. They didn't have good supplies. So he is going to replace some of these older officers with younger men, and he's going to pay them a little bit better. And he says, okay, this is going to be worth it in the long run because we'll get the colonists to help pay for all of this after we win the war. George Washington, because of his previous military experience, he is going to fight side by side with the British forces under a guy named Edward Braddock. And Edward Braddock was old school England officer. And during this battle of Fort Duquesne, Washington actually had 2 horses shot out from under him, and he had bullet holes in his coat, and some say he had a bullet hole through his hat, and yet he was not wounded. And so this reputation for George Washington being this great warrior is going to build. Braddock is killed because he doesn't listen to Washington, and he fights old style, British old style. And so Braddock is killed, and once again, this is not a battle that is won by the English. So these are some of the ways that the British fought, and they are going to lose because they all marched in a straight line where the French and the Indians are hiding behind trees. They're wearing red coats. They weren't used to fighting in bad weather. They used to plan their battles, and they were used to organize battles instead of kind of what we call guerrilla warfare, which we'll talk about even later. So Here's George Washington again. And you can't lose most of the battles you fought in and still be considered a great general. Well, that's not necessarily true because George Washington is going to end up losing more battles than he wins, but he was a great general. The turning point of the war is what a battle called the Battle of Quebec. And this young general, James Wolfe, he is going to plan a nighttime raid, which the old school guys never did. And they actually climb a cliff and attack a French fort in the dead of night. And sadly, Wolfe is going to win the battle, but he dies. He gets hit and he dies. So this is a picture. You can see where they're climbing up the cliff from the water, and this is going to be the turning point of the war. This shows how Wolfe came in, and you can see where Quebec is, and that's where the French are going to surrender. So when the war ends, they're going to sign the Treaty of Paris. This is going to be one of many Treaty of Parises. And France is going to give up Canada, all of its land east of the Mississippi, and then Spain gets all the land west of the Mississippi and the port of New Orleans. So basically the French are going to be out of North America. They're going to lose all that land. So you can see here before, the French is the kind of the yellowish color, and then after, you don't see any French territory at all. All that kind of purplish is now England, and everything to the west of the Mississippi belongs to the Spanish. But after the French and Indian War, more settlers begin moving west into Native American land. This guy, Pontiac, was an Ottawa chief, and he starts attacking. And he realizes that these English, they're not going to give up, and they're going to keep pushing, and that is going to hurt the Native Americans' way of life. King George, though, it was really expensive protecting these settlers, and remember, it's much like Bacon's rebellion. So he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. You can't move to the west. We just can't afford to send protection. So he issues what is called the Proclamation of 1763. And he says, just don't move there. Just don't move there, and that'll take care of the Indian problem. Well, if you've just fought a war and you want looking at all that land, and all that land's available all the way to the Mississippi, this did not sit well with the colonists. They wanted to move. They were angry, and they felt they had a right to that land after fighting side by side with the English. They also thought the king was kind of a despot, that he was limiting their freedom. And here you have a quote from King George III. I wish nothing but good. Therefore, everyone who does not agree with me is a traitor and a scoundrel. That's going to kind of be his attitude right up to and through the Revolutionary War. So Britain is in debt, and they think, okay, how are we going to clear this debt? We're going to start taxing and really watching over the colonies. So they're going to start tightening things up, and this is going to lead to resentment by the colonists. And you know where that's going to go, okay? It's going to lead up to the Revolutionary War.